I knew the moment her phone came out that my quiet afternoon was about to explode, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next, so stay with me because the ending flips everything you think you know. It was a clear weekday, the kind where the base slows to a crawl, and I had parked my truck halfway across my own driveway while unloading equipment for a scheduled inspection. The gate behind me was open, the ID placard visible, and my uniform jacket was folded neatly on the passenger seat. I was inside for maybe 3 minutes when I heard the sharp, offended voice cutting through the air like a siren. She stood there with crossed arms and a look of absolute authority, tapping her foot as if she owned the ground beneath us. She told me I was blocking a resident's access, that rules applied to everyone, and that she was already calling the police. I tried to explain calmly, but she spoke over me, loudly enough for neighbors to peek through curtains. Her phone was already pressed to her ear, and I heard her describe me as some reckless civilian who thought he could ignore regulations. What she didn't realize was that this wasn't just any driveway. This was a secured access point tied directly to the base, and I wasn't just some guy with a truck. I was the officer responsible for this entire installation, the person whose signature authorized every patrol, checkpoint, and response protocol. I watched as she paced, narrating her version of events with dramatic flair, adding details that never happened. Part of me wanted to stop her immediately, flash my credentials, and end the scene. Another part stayed quiet, curious to see how far she would take it. I leaned against the doorframe, listening as she demanded urgent action, insisting I be removed. The irony was thick enough to taste. When she finally hung up, she looked satisfied, convinced justice was on the way. She warned me I'd regret this, that authority was about to arrive and teach me a lesson. I simply nodded, because I knew something she didn't. The call she made was about to come straight back to me, and the consequences would be unforgettable. Around us, the base seemed to hold its breath, flags barely moving, radio silent, as if everything sensed the collision coming. I could almost see the timeline splitting, one path where I corrected her, another where the truth landed harder. I chose patience, steady and unreadable, letting the moment stretch, knowing authority reveals itself best when challenged openly. This was not revenge, just inevitability unfolding exactly as it always does. Scanning the scene exactly as trained. Before he could speak, she rushed forward, pointing at me like she'd caught a criminal in the act. Her story poured out fast, tangled with outrage and certainty, each sentence painting me as an entitled trespasser who refused to follow simple rules. I watched the officer's eyes flick briefly toward the access markers, the signage, the controlled perimeter he recognized instantly. He asked for identification, directing the request at me first, calm and neutral. That was when she smirked, already celebrating what she thought was my downfall. I reached into my truck, deliberately slow, and handed over my credentials without a word. The change was immediate. His posture shifted, shoulders straightening, eyes widening just enough to signal recognition. He looked from the ID back to my face, then snapped into a crisp, respectful stance. He addressed me by rank, loud enough for her to hear, and asked how he could assist. The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. She laughed awkwardly, assuming it was some kind of mistake, and tried to interrupt. The officer held up a hand, eyes never leaving me, waiting for instruction. I explained the situation plainly, that I was unloading equipment on my own secured drive, and that a complaint had been made. He nodded, understanding perfectly. Then he turned to her. His tone remained professional, but the authority was unmistakable as he explained where she was, who I was, and why her call was not only unnecessary, but inappropriate. Color drained from her face as realization set in, each word landing harder than the last. She tried to recover, stammering about rules and fairness, but the ground had shifted beneath her. The officer informed her that misuse of emergency services was a serious matter, especially on a military installation. I watched the confidence crumble, replaced by quiet panic. For a moment, no one spoke. The lesson didn't need emphasis. Power, real power, doesn't shout or threaten. It waits, lets others expose themselves, then responds with facts and calm authority that cannot be argued away. Neighbors who had gathered now watched silently, some embarrassed, others fascinated, as the story rewrote itself in real time. Phones lowered, whispers stopped, and the air felt cleaner somehow. Accountability has a way of sobering a crowd, reminding everyone that assumptions can collapse instantly when confronted by truth, structure, and clearly defined responsibility. I could feel the moment settle, permanent, unforgettable, etched into memory for everyone present. Especially her. Right then. No doubt. Could. She stood off to the side, arms wrapped around herself now, avoiding eye contact with anyone nearby. The authority she tried to summon had instead revealed her own misunderstanding of power. As the patrol car pulled away, normal sounds slowly returned. A distant engine, a gate closing, flags snapping lightly in the wind. She lingered, clearly wanting to say something, perhaps an apology, perhaps an explanation. Whatever it was, the confidence that fueled her earlier confrontation was gone. She finally approached, voice quieter, asking how she could have known. I answered honestly, explaining that respect starts with questions, not accusations. Places like this run on structure and trust, and assuming guilt only creates unnecessary conflict. She nodded, though I wasn't sure the lesson fully landed. What stayed with me wasn't her reaction, but how quickly situations escalate when people believe authority is something you can wield without understanding. Real leadership is invisible until needed. It doesn't announce itself with threats or volume. It simply exists, steady and prepared. Later that evening, as reports were finalized and routines resumed, I reflected on how easily the outcome could have changed if I'd reacted differently. Ego would have turned it ugly. Anger would have made it memorable for the wrong reasons. Patience let the truth surface naturally. Stories like this travel fast. By the next day, it had already become a quiet reminder passed between personnel about professionalism, restraint, and the importance of knowing your environment before acting. Not as gossip, but as guidance. In the end, no one was arrested, no fines issued, no dramatic punishment delivered. The real consequence was internal, a recalibration of assumptions. Sometimes that's far more effective. Authority isn't proven by calling it down on others. It's proven by how you carry yourself when challenged, and how you allow systems to work as designed, without interference. That day reinforced something I try to teach every new officer under my command. Situations test character before credentials. Anyone can escalate, but it takes discipline to de-escalate while remaining firm. Watching the process unfold reminded me why protocols exist, why patience is trained, and why humility matters even when rank gives you every advantage. For viewers, remember this moment whenever conflict feels personal, because perspective can quietly turn confrontation into clarity without force. The calm choice often feels unsatisfying, yet it protects everyone involved, including those who never realize they needed it. That lesson endures long after voices fade away and memories settle into wisdom. Quietly. Always. By the following week, the incident had faded from daily conversation, but its impact lingered in subtle ways. Interactions felt more measured, questions replaced assumptions, and there was a renewed respect for boundaries that often go unnoticed until crossed. I returned to routine duties, inspections, briefings, and planning, carrying the quiet satisfaction of a lesson learned without spectacle. Occasionally, I'd see her around the area. Our exchanges were polite, distant, and grounded in mutual awareness. No resentment, no triumph, just understanding. Sometimes the most effective resolution leaves no visible scars, only adjusted behavior. For me, the experience reaffirmed why leadership demands restraint. Power is not about winning confrontations, but about preventing them from becoming necessary. It's about allowing systems to function and people to grow through their own realizations. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: before calling authority down on someone, pause and ask whether you truly understand the situation. Confidence without knowledge can collapse instantly, and humility can save everyone time, dignity, and regret. Moments like these remind us that respect is a two-way street, built through patience and listening rather than volume and threats. In a world quick to escalate, choosing calm is a quiet form of strength. The driveway was cleared, the day moved on, and life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Yet that ordinary moment carried an extraordinary reminder about responsibility, perception, and the unseen weight of command. Stories don't always end with sirens or punishment. Sometimes they end with awareness, and that can be far more powerful. Thank you for staying with me through this experience, and remember, authority is most effective when it doesn't need to announce itself. I share this not to shame anyone, but to highlight how easily misunderstandings arise when emotion outruns context. Every role, from civilian neighbor to commanding officer, carries responsibility. When we slow down and observe, we often discover cooperation where conflict seemed inevitable. That awareness transforms everyday encounters into opportunities for mutual respect and learning. Viewers often ask what they would have done differently. My answer is simple: nothing. Letting systems work protects fairness. Intervention too early can distort truth, while patience gives clarity space to emerge, revealing reality without forcing it. Whether in neighborhoods, workplaces, or families, the principle remains. Listen first. Verify second. Act last. These steps prevent unnecessary harm and preserve dignity for everyone involved, even when tensions feel justified. That mindset, practiced daily, builds trust quietly over time and reduces moments where authority must intervene at all. It turns ordinary spaces into safer, calmer places for everyone sharing them. And that outcome matters more than pride. Every single time. Without exception. Remember that. Always. What most people never see after moments like that is the quiet recalibration that follows, the subtle shift in how a place breathes once tension has passed. In the days after the incident, I noticed small changes everywhere. Conversations paused before accusations. People asked questions they would have once assumed answers to. Respect didn't become louder, it became deliberate, and that mattered more than any apology. I addressed the situation during a routine briefing, not naming names, not retelling the drama, but extracting the lesson. Authority, I reminded everyone, is contextual. It lives inside systems, procedures, and mutual understanding, not in volume or entitlement. The room listened closely, because everyone had either witnessed the event or heard enough to know it was real. Later, a junior officer approached me privately. He admitted he would have reacted emotionally if put in my position. He asked how I stayed calm. I told him the truth. Calm isn't natural. It's trained. It's choosing outcome over ego, even when your pride demands immediate correction. That answer stayed with him, I could tell. That evening, driving past the same driveway, I thought about how quickly narratives form. One blocked path, one assumption, one phone call, and suddenly stories collide. Most conflicts aren't born from malice, but from certainty without verification. That realization is humbling, especially for those entrusted with power. Weeks passed, and the incident quietly became part of base culture, referenced indirectly, a shorthand reminder to slow down. New arrivals were advised gently. Ask first. Observe second. Escalate last. The environment felt steadier because of it. I never spoke to her again beyond brief nods, and that was enough. Closure doesn't always require conversation. Sometimes it lives in changed behavior and unspoken understanding. Looking back, I'm grateful the moment unfolded the way it did. Not because I was right, but because restraint proved stronger than reaction. It reinforced why leadership is less about command presence and more about responsibility under pressure. If you're watching this and thinking about your own moments of conflict, remember that patience can feel like weakness when it's actually discipline in disguise. The loudest person in the room rarely holds the most authority. The calmest one often does. Stories like these aren't about winning. They're about learning how not to lose yourself when challenged. That lesson extends far beyond uniforms, gates, or titles. It applies anywhere people intersect with assumptions, power, and pride. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. By the sixth day after the incident, the ripple effect of that confrontation had settled into quiet lessons across the base. People moved differently, slightly more deliberate, a little more attentive, not because of fear, but because awareness had replaced assumption. What struck me most wasn't her reaction, or even the officer's respect, it was how fast clarity spreads once patience and authority intersect. I arrived at the command office early that morning, sunlight spilling across the rows of desks, and noticed subtle shifts: personnel discussing procedures instead of rumors, new recruits asking questions about access protocols instead of jumping to conclusions, and even longtime staff pausing before issuing orders or judgments. It was as if the day itself had absorbed the lesson of restraint, allowing careful observation to replace impulsive reaction. Later, I was called to review a logistical issue at the perimeter, a routine check that suddenly felt like a metaphor for the week. Each gate, each checkpoint, each detail mattered, not just because of security, but because every layer of oversight reminded me of the fragile balance between authority and accountability. The driveway incident wasn't just a personal story anymore, it had become a case study in leadership and perception. As I walked the grounds, I passed her again. She stopped, hesitated, then nodded a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of the lesson learned. No words were exchanged, but the weight of understanding passed silently between us. Some of the most profound consequences happen without a single sound. Her pride remained intact, and my authority remained quiet but unmistakable. That balance is far more effective than confrontation. I returned to my office and reviewed reports, double-checking schedules and security logs. While everything appeared normal on paper, I knew the real change was invisible. Confidence now came with caution, assumptions were replaced by verification, and the base itself felt calmer. In that silence, leadership proved its power not by force, but by demonstrating foresight, knowledge, and patience. By mid-afternoon, I held an informal discussion with my team, weaving the driveway story into a larger lesson about communication and responsibility. I emphasized that real authority isn't about asserting dominance, it's about guiding behavior before mistakes escalate. They listened, nodding, some taking notes, others simply absorbing the wisdom of a situation they had all witnessed indirectly. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the base, I reflected quietly on how moments of confrontation often carry the strongest potential for teaching. A single phone call, a blocked driveway, and a mistaken assumption could have created chaos. Instead, it became a blueprint for restraint, showing that authority exercised correctly resolves conflict without spectacle. Sometimes the quietest lessons leave the deepest mark. And as the day ended, I knew the incident, now fading into memory, had reshaped not just her understanding, but the culture around me: subtle, invisible, and profoundly effective. A week later, the base had returned to its regular rhythm, but the driveway incident lingered in ways no one could ignore. It wasn't whispered about like gossip or exaggerated into legend, it had become a subtle, guiding example of how assumptions can mislead even the most confident individuals. For me, it was a quiet reminder that authority is most potent when it doesn't need to announce itself. That morning, I walked the perimeter for a routine inspection, observing the way everyone moved, the way orders were executed, the precision in minor details that often go unnoticed. It struck me how much the previous confrontation had shifted behavior. Officers approached tasks with more clarity, double-checking steps, verifying information before acting. Even newcomers, unaware of the full story, seemed to operate with a sense of caution rooted in respect for process rather than fear of consequence. During midday briefings, I shared parts of the story, carefully focusing on the lessons rather than the drama. I emphasized patience, observation, and the importance of verifying facts before escalation. Authority, I told them, isn't about reacting fastest or loudest, it's about responding most appropriately, with both calm and precision. There was a quiet nodding in the room. Some understood immediately, others absorbed it over time. Later, I encountered her again, this time in the administrative office. She was organizing some paperwork, clearly preoccupied, but she paused when our eyes met. There was a momentary hesitation, then a subtle nod, almost invisible. No words passed between us. Yet that silent acknowledgement carried more weight than any conversation could have. Understanding doesn't always require speech, sometimes it exists in the recognition of consequences and the quiet acceptance of truth. As the afternoon unfolded, I reflected on leadership's quiet power. It's often invisible, operating in the spaces between action and reaction, in the patience exercised when provoked, in the careful observation that prevents mistakes before they escalate. That driveway incident could have ended differently if pride or impatience had taken the lead. But it didn't. Restraint allowed clarity to emerge naturally, and that made the lesson far more effective than confrontation ever could. By the evening, reports were complete, routines resumed, and the base settled into its familiar rhythm. Yet the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Decisions were made with awareness, not haste. Communications were clearer. Conflict was met with observation before escalation. Authority had quietly reinforced itself not through loud proclamations, but through the demonstration of discipline and foresight. I realized then that the most impactful lessons often happen off the record, in moments of subtle recalibration, in the invisible reinforcement of order and respect. The driveway incident had transformed from a personal encounter into a broader teaching moment for everyone involved. And in that transformation, the true essence of leadership, calm, informed, patient, and deliberate, revealed itself in its purest form. By the time the following week rolled around, the driveway incident had fully transitioned from a tense confrontation into an unspoken lesson embedded in the base's daily operations. I noticed it in the smallest details: personnel checking their surroundings before acting, junior officers asking questions before assuming the worst, even longtime staff taking an extra moment to verify procedures rather than rushing to judgment. Authority, as I'd hoped, had become invisible yet undeniable. That morning began with an unexpected inspection request. I arrived at a section of the base I hadn't focused on recently, noting how smoothly operations ran despite increased activity. Staff moved efficiently, with no signs of confusion or conflict. It struck me how much influence a single moment of restraint can have when modeled correctly. People adjust naturally, not because they are told to, but because the environment rewards careful observation over impulsive action. During a mid-morning briefing, I used a small portion of the incident to illustrate the importance of patience, awareness, and verification. A single assumption, I told them, can cascade into chaos if unchecked. Leadership is the art of allowing systems to function while guiding others to clarity. Sometimes the most powerful action is patience. The room was quiet, but attentive. I knew the lesson had taken root when questions began, not about blame, but about how to prevent misunderstandings before they start. Later, I saw her again in the common area. She was working through some administrative forms, her posture a little straighter than before, her pace deliberate. I nodded as I passed. No words were exchanged. That was enough. True understanding doesn't require apologies or explanations, it often arrives silently, evidenced only by altered behavior and renewed respect for process. By evening, I reflected on the larger picture. The incident could have been explosive, a moment that escalated into conflict or resentment. Instead, it became a blueprint for leadership, discipline, and awareness. Real authority, I realized, is not measured by the number of confrontations one wins but by the ability to prevent unnecessary ones entirely. Every officer, every staff member, and even the residents of the surrounding community benefited from that quiet recalibration. The driveway itself had returned to normal use, vehicles coming and going without incident. Yet that ordinary stretch of concrete carried an extraordinary lesson. One phone call, one blocked path, one misunderstanding transformed into clarity, discipline, and respect. That is the power of patience. As the base quieted down under the fading light, I understood that stories like these aren't just about authority, they're about the unseen ways leadership shapes behavior, molds culture, and instills awareness. Moments that appear small at first can ripple outward, influencing decisions, interactions, and perspectives long after the immediate conflict has passed. And in that quiet, invisible impact lies the true mark of responsibility. By the 9th day, the driveway incident had fully settled into the background, yet its lessons continued to echo through the base in subtle, profound ways. The atmosphere was calmer, interactions more measured, and decision-making far more deliberate. It was remarkable how a single confrontation, handled with patience and authority, could create such a quiet but lasting ripple of awareness. That morning, as I conducted my routine inspection of the perimeter, I noticed that the personnel seemed unusually confident, not because of fear or pressure, but because they understood the systems in place and trusted them. Each checkpoint, each gate, each protocol was followed with precision. The driveway incident had become an invisible teacher, shaping behavior without needing to dominate the conversation or demand attention. During a scheduled training session later that day, I addressed the team, emphasizing the broader lessons from the event. True authority, I told them, is revealed not by confrontation, but by understanding, patience, and the ability to guide outcomes quietly. We influence others most effectively when we allow systems and procedures to work while remaining calm and deliberate. The room listened attentively, some taking notes, others simply internalizing the message. I could see the lesson sinking in. Later, she appeared again in the administrative area, moving quickly but with noticeable care. Our eyes met briefly, and she offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that understanding had arrived. No conversation was needed. The change was evident not just in her, but in the culture of those around us. Subtle shifts, like tiny gears moving in a well-oiled machine, demonstrated how patience and structure could quietly correct missteps and misunderstandings. As the day ended, I reflected on the power of restraint. The driveway incident could have escalated, leaving resentment, embarrassment, or even disciplinary action in its wake. Instead, it had evolved into a lasting example of leadership in action. By letting the truth and procedures unfold naturally, I had transformed a moment of tension into a demonstration of discipline, foresight, and responsibility. Walking back to my office as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I realized how easily ordinary spaces could become arenas of learning when handled with calm and clarity. One blocked driveway, one mistaken assumption, and a single call had produced a wealth of understanding not through drama or confrontation, but through subtle, deliberate action. That is the true measure of authority, guiding without needing to dominate, teaching without raising a voice, and shaping behavior without coercion. The base returned to its normal rhythm, yet the invisible lesson remained, quietly influencing decisions, interactions, and attitudes long after the incident itself had faded. It was a reminder that patience, observation, and calm authority are far more powerful than volume, anger, or immediate reaction. Sometimes, the quietest lessons are the ones that resonate the longest, leaving a lasting impact on everyone involved.